ado, allow me to welcome Zanisha Munsami, who's the head of ISD Technology Innovation Agency, and she will be introducing our facilitator for this panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for the introduction. So Africa's future really lies in the youth, and hence the reason why I'd like to introduce our facilitator for today. His name is Sakile Dlamini. He's currently the technology analyst at the Embassy of Switzerland, where he focuses on commercialization of applied research by fostering engagement with industry, academia, and government institutions. He's a former investment director at the GAD Group, a Silicon Valley-based blockchain and digital currency-oriented asset management firm, really geared towards technology development, advancement, and sustainable impact. He was based in San Francisco, California, where he completed his Bachelor in Business Administration degree, and thereafter he really majored in finance as well as economics and graduated top of his class. Sakile's wealth management experience also led him to working with established firms in a one wealth advisory firm, the Dynasty Financial Group. He's really an energetic seeker, having his selection for Pan-Africanism and really looking to make a difference for the youth in South Africa. So I'd like to hand you over to our facilitator for today, Sakile. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You'd think after the tea break, people would be more energized. That was a well-deserved break. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Sanisha had mentioned, my name is Sakile Dlamini. And one thing Sanisha did not mention is that she kindly requested, more like urged me to be here today, and I thought it was an amazing opportunity. I'm truly humbled and I appreciate the platform for us to engage with someone such as these. As in the fourth industrial revolution, there's a lot of differentiation that's taking place. Everybody's running in different directions, and they often say, if you want to go far, you go together. If you want to go fast, you go alone. And I believe that someone such as these were able to come together in caucus and actually talk and see that everybody's on the same page and nobody's left out of the picture or behind. I invite you today for us to hold each other's hands and let us step into the fourth industrial revolution instead of falling and tripping into it. To kick things off and diving straight into the juicy meat of the segment, which is appropriately titled South Africa, Silicon Valley, Startups, and Global Connectivity. I'd like to kick off today with the Development Bank of South Africa's video, which encapsulates the core essence of our theme. If we could please move on to the video, and after that, we'll be able to engage with our highly esteemed panel. Thank you.
Our world is accelerating at an exponential rate, and everything is now a path to change. Imagine living in a world where the possible is unlimited for our imaginations. Welcome to delegates, an experiential learning hub to evolve and train leaders of tomorrow. State-of-the-art facilities and facial recognition grant access to the DLAB for the community. to build and program robots to race and do all types of functions. Learn to build and pilot the next delivery drones. Work on how to give any object eyes and ears so they can become smart devices. The D-Lab will have an area to sit and contemplate your next innovation, with areas to relax and eat with the community, do yoga, or meditate. The D-Lab is a vision of what a future of learning and developing the leaders of tomorrow could look like. We hope you enjoy this virtual reality fly-through.
Wow. Wow. The first thing that comes to mind is, first of all, what is this? I'm sure some of you may have had the same sentiment. The second thought comes to mind is, how are we getting ready for this? Thank you very much for the video. This was presented to us by the Head of Innovation and Culture from the Development Bank of South Africa, Ms. Carrie Joost. And Carrie, I'd like to engage you to help us unpack this video. There's a lot of catchphrases: fourth industrial revolution, virtual reality, drones, blockchain technology, let's not forget the infamous AI that everybody knows so much about. Carrie, I'd like to talk less from a technical perspective due to the nature of our theme. How does this actually impact the human and the social aspect of our students as well as our communities on the ground? The facilities are amazing, but how can we track the tangible impact that this will bring?
Thanks, Sakile. So good afternoon, everyone. So I think you made a great point, is what is this? So before I go into the what is this, I just want to kind of give a background about the Development Bank. So many of you know and might be thinking, what is the Development Bank's role? So as the Development Bank of Southern Africa, our focus is mostly on infrastructure. So in the context of having a discussion about skills of the future, is in order to deliver and give access to the skills of the future from a development position, we needed to start having a conversation about what is the infrastructure needed for access. So that's really where kind of the idea was birthed, and I loved how you started with the proverb of, you know, we can go far together. So what we did is we said, okay, planning for the infrastructure of the future, we're not even talking about 5 years, we looked at the full spectrum from what is needed now, 5, 10, 15 years of the future. And what we're sitting with is we're sitting with schools that might not have access to, whether it's labs or you saw the bio labs or the VR, and in certain areas not even access to full curriculums. We have teachers that might not have access to learn the skills to teach some of the skills that some of my colleagues will talk about. So that was the starting point and where the D labs were birthed. So the D is really focusing on development. So as a development finance institute, is we focus on what is the transition. So we have a world where we want to get to, where people have access to the skills. How do we transition there? And one of the ideas were these D labs. And essentially what it will be is that the hubs will be placed in areas, and we've crowded partners in. Actually, some of my colleagues who are on the panel now are some of our partners with it. Is really the first one. This video that you've seen will actually be in Tembisa, but we long-term over the next 5 years have a rollout of 30 sites where we're collaborating with DST, TIA, CSIR, across the spectrum, where we're crowding in, and private sector as well. So we have partners with Microsoft, Trevor Noah Foundation. What we did is we looked for experts who were already excelling in some of the areas that you've seen. And we said to them, if we create the environment, if we provide the infrastructure, will you come in and run the program so that the kids can have access to the cutting edge skills? So that's why you saw there, and if I just unpack a little bit of that, is the classroom styles during non-working time or school time, is they would double up as a co-working space. I think my colleagues will speak to incubators and access to the entrepreneurial skills, so that will give access from the community for parents, because the other conversation is we keep talking about skills for our kids and the children and the youth, what about the parents that need to parent according with these skills? What about the teachers who need to be resourced in how to deal with it? So we looked at a co-working space, access to connectivity, really also partnered with international universities, Udacity. We're busy having conversations about other online programs. So that spectrum will be really in the classroom space. The virtual reality labs, and I think my colleague from Singularity will also speak to it, is virtual reality also, when we talk access, allows for access to, instead of building a science lab, is if we have the science curriculum in the VR devices, what does that give access to? We're also really focused when we talk skills of the future about the human components. So we know everyone's talking about AI and the impact of that, the cloud tech. What we're saying is, what about the human skills that are needed? And that's really been our focus as well. So we're focusing on adaptability. That's what we phrased it. Some people call it resilience. But how do you cope with the change? What does it look like? So really those skills then will come out of there. And where that ties back with the VR is one of our partners, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it, is Yes for Youth, is they're using the tech tools also to show kids the prediction for the future. So they actually, as an example, take a snapshot and age the kids and say, if you don't start saving, as an example, if you don't study, if you don't learn further, this is what your life might look like. And from a neuroscience perspective, can you imagine seeing your future play out for you in virtual reality? It just starts to provide a different kind of learning environment. So that's the VR. There's a maker space from the industrial perspective, the 3D printers and that. And you saw there at the end the mindfulness. So the yoga, the mindfulness, that ties in with the adaptability quotient and really just looking at the spectrum of skills of a human, the human needs for learning. So what do we need for learning is really where we spoke to. I don't know, guys, everyone else will chip in because most of you have been part of the discussions. But that's really what kind of encapsulates the D-Labs. And each, just to close up with the footprint, is we have a base looking at these hubs. So there will be certain things that will be consistent with each of the D-Labs, but then each area obviously has different needs. So you mentioned from a monitoring perspective is what we're also looking to create a social currency, which then feeds into our monitoring and evaluation. And what we mean by that is there'll be a lot of free courses available, as an example, whether it's through Microsoft or through Udacity or TIA, Singularity as an example. And each youth, or whether it's parent or whatever from the community that completes that course, you will earn like a token. And then you are kind of in charge of your own destiny of moving yourself through the process. The more tokens you collect, it unlocks actual access to degrees or nano degrees, which is the short-term degrees. So by default, we're actually already changing the behavior and unlocking those skills with adaptability, critical thinking, and planning. So that's a snapshot of the D-Labs.
Thank you very much, Kerry. I think understanding from what you're sharing is that you're trying to foster a culture of independence, a culture where students feel that they are in charge of their destiny. And that's very hard when you're speaking to people that come from different backgrounds and are previously disadvantaged. It's very hard to tell somebody, no, get up and do it for yourself, when things aren't the same back home. So I like the fact you're giving people the opportunity to convert their hard work into tangible accreditations and qualifications that ultimately help address the widespread lack of unemployment in our country. So thank you very much, Gary. With what you had mentioned about mindfulness, I think it's very, very critical for us to think about how do we cope in an uncopable environment? How do we cope in an ever-shifting, tectonic plate-shifting environment where you wake up, okay, today I'm studying VR. Tomorrow there's something called AR. And now you're like, has the whole alphabet flipped from A to Z and Z to A. But all these acronyms sometimes help cloud our understanding that VR means virtual reality. AR means augmented reality. And both of these things are similar, but at the same time vastly different. And to help unpack us with this the stigma of the technicality that limits our education and understanding of technology and how we can ultimately engage with it. I'd like to introduce the co-CEO of Singularity University, South Africa, Mr. Mick Mann.
Thanks. Well, first I just want to say thanks for having us here. It's really exciting to see so many people in one room discussing the future of education and skills needed. We are Singularity U South Africa. Our mission is to create a global community of change makers across Africa who are able to implement solutions to some of Africa's and the world's global grand challenges. I don't know if anyone knows about Singularity University, but it's a global organization based at NASAM's Research Center in Silicon Valley. It was started by Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis. Ray Kurzweil's probably one of the greatest predictors of the future of our time and greatest futurist. In 1999, he came out with about 174 predictions, where he had about 86% accuracy to the year. One of them that he was off on was the autonomous vehicles. He said we would have them by now, but we're about 5 years off, according to his latest predictions. And he came up with this theory, looking at the way computing is going, that by 2029, based on Moore's law, the computer will be able to reverse engineer the human brain, and the computer becomes as smart as one human. And by 2045, the computing power will be so powerful that we will reverse engineer the entire human race, all over 9 billion people, and there's going to be a merging between man and machine, the singularity. So he started this university to get ahead of all these trends with this other entrepreneur, Peter Diamandis, with the goal to say, how do we use exponential technology like robotics, AI, 3D printing, all the ones you mentioned, how do we use that to try to solve some of the biggest problems we have in our world, like education, disaster resilience, poverty, prosperity, so water. So, one of our big goals is that we've gone now and brought Singularity to South Africa to educate leaders and future leaders and equip them with the mindset, skill set, and network to create this abundant future for all. And we run various programs and events to try equip them for that. And we're so proud to be partnered with the DBSA on our mission to create real impact in Africa. That's pretty much us. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to follow up with, Mick, you had mentioned that you guys, the founding of Singularity University was in Silicon Valley. I wanted to ask, just last week we had the presence of, and the honor of welcoming Mr. Salim Ismail.
Yes.
And, he's one of your colleagues from across the ocean. One question that I had from a practical perspective, how do you see the emergence of technologies such as Slack that allow us to engage with teams and diverse organizations across continents, across time zones? How do you guys, as Singularity, keep the mission that was founded by Ray? How do you guys keep championing that it hasn't diverted from the different chapters that are there in the world? How do you guys keep that?
So what's incredible about Singularity University is like a living, breathing algorithm of incredible people. And when incredible people get together, they can do incredible things. So it's all about constantly evolving and changing methodologies and being agile and ready to shift and move and not being stuck to an old process or an old way of doing things. Just one example is that when we do calls, we're in 65 countries, we're on a Zoom call with 65 people from 65 different countries on a weekly basis. We're all on Slack together. So the whole global organization is on Slack for communication. We don't email each other. Everything gets handled through Slack. Only if we're dealing with outside partners or colleagues do we use email. We use Asana for task management and Salesforce to handle sales. So they're very adept with using the latest and greatest platforms that can help you scale and grow much faster because they are scaling and going much faster than us. So it would be in our best interest to take note of that and try to bring that back to our continent.
Perfect. And just to touch on the last thing of the VR, I think people sometimes get overwhelmed by the phrase Fourth Industrial Revolution, but some of these aspects, if we look closely to our history, we can find these aspects. You speak about VR. If I'm not mistaken, if you look, for example, at a flight simulation, wouldn't that be an example of virtual reality, whereby a student is then able to be put into a real-life scenario and train and get better and stronger as a candidate? Can you speak to how VR is set to impact and revolutionize education, whereby someone can actually learn how to code, learn how to 3D print through a simulation of goggles.
Absolutely. Well, can I just see from a show of hands, who's tried VR in this room? Who's tried a VR goggle headset? So a couple of you, okay? So I promise you in about 2 years, you will have all tried one. It's going to be ubiquitous. Facebook is coming out with the Oculus Max. They came out with the Oculus Go last year, which is so you don't need a computer tied to your headset anymore in this powerful machine. And we're busy working on how do we recreate education in virtual reality. Because if you think about whose kids here have played Fortnite in the room? Fortnite, the game Fortnite. Okay, so only a few of you. Fortnite is one of the biggest online games at the moment where a bunch of kids get together and they all join in the game, and it's a social experience because you are interacting with your friends, and that is a new way of interacting, and that is the future of social environments, of work, and of handling machines from a remote location. So in the future, you're going to be working in VR, building programming using visual languages. Why not teach our kids from when they are young how to work in these platforms? So it's much more immersive working in a virtual reality platform, actually doing things, than learning to try repeat how to do things and doing it by memory. So we feel that there's going to be a massive, massive rise in virtual reality education, and it's better to teach the kids the tools that they're going to need in the future rather than teaching them in this old way of writing on paper.
That's amazing. And I think
Who's writing on paper now? You should be on a digital platform.
it's a slight shift of mindset. One thing that you did mention, though, Nick, that I'd like to touch on is that technology has given us the ability to be global, to touch 65 countries at the click of a button. One thing that we have noticed is that we are not all starting on the same line. I think if we look at, for example, in the Olympics, they have so much importance on everybody starting on an equal level playing field. And one thing that these technologies don't sometimes take into consideration is you need electricity to do VR. You need a classroom to do VR.
Yes.
You need a skilled teacher to do VR. So one thing I'd like to touch on, moving on to our next speaker, Mr. Gareth Williams, who is the head research specialist of intelligence from the Technological Innovation Agency, is that first we had the first industrial revolution, which was the steam engine. The second was electricity, the invention of the light bulb. Third was the advent of internet. And now we're here, AI and blockchain. Given the fact that we know that technology is going to change how the globe works, let's localize this question. What does this mean for South Africa? What does this mean for us? How is South Africa currently positioned to take advantage of the global trends of technology? Mr. Goff, over to you.
Thank you. So just firstly, a little bit about the Technology Innovation Agency, and it's very quickly, TIA exists to achieve socioeconomic impact through technological innovation. There's some other bits and pieces that we do as well, but essentially at our core, that's our key objective and mandate. So a lot of the talk about the fourth industrial revolution centers around technologies. But actually, sorry, can you turn that on? There seems to be another mic on somewhere. I'll push on. It's, mostly people talk about technologies, and especially disruptive technologies. And I'd like to actually take a slightly different perspective and look at dealing with technological change. It kind of touches on Carrie's perspective around building resilience and around capabilities. So I think to me it's broader than just skills. It's about capabilities of society and also in firms. So essentially, we're particularly concerned in South Africa about growth and about jobs, etc. But essentially, if you look over the long term, long-run economic growth is not determined by labor, capital, and land, which are the conventional factors of production. It's actually something called total factor productivity, which accounts for around 2/3 of economic growth over the long term. And that is actually underpinned by improvements in productivity. And those productivity improvements are created by breakthrough technologies. Okay. But I'd like to go a step back and essentially where these technologies come from. They don't just appear out of the blue or matter from the sky. They're created through people and companies and societies that have deep and broad scientific and knowledge-based capabilities. So essentially, it's not about the technology, it's about the people with the skills and the capabilities. So you often, this is one of the early World Economic Forum graphics around the fourth industrial revolution. I'm not going to go through it, but essentially what I do want to do is show you this one, which is essentially, this is now a different perspective. According to world-renowned Carlota Perez, she's an excellent economist, we've actually gone through 5 technological revolutions. What I want to point out to you in this graphic is if you look at the core country where these big bang initiators started, it's country specific. So it started in Britain, then the next one is Britain, spread to the Europe and the USA. Then the USA and Germany took the lead in further industrial technological revolutions. All alongside this, Africa was experiencing colonialism. So we didn't participate. So be very, so what I'm trying to say is there are opportunities, but they're not evenly distributed. What happened is that you got an invention in the UK, for example, and it might take decades to spread to other regions. That is essentially the reality of the world we live in today. So as much as we might want to think we're going to lead in the fourth industrial revolution, the reality is we're probably going to end up, like most previous technological revolutions, as recipients of technology. And so then it comes back to how do we actually shape our science, technology, and innovation system. Currently the focus, and there's nothing wrong with this really, is on scientific research, basic and applied scientific research. And part of my concern is that over the last 10 years, the amount of money out of the budget we have and the companies that spend on R&D and innovation, the amount of the proportion that's gone to basic and applied research has risen from 55% of gross expenditure spent on R&D to 74%. The real stuff, according to where the stuff happens around experimental development, where you're actually building these deep capabilities in firms and in society, we've declined from 45% in 2007-8 to 26% now in 2016-17. So to me, that is an area of big concern. There's nothing wrong with continuing to do scientific research, but as an emerging economy, we really need to be focusing more on experimental development so we can build those capabilities so we can actually take almost a Singaporean approach to development. What they did is they started by industrializing through importing technology, then they started to tweak their technology, then they started to do some local assembly, some local adaptation, some local manufacturing, until eventually they are where they are today. And I'm not saying we should replicate that model because essentially it's a benign dictatorship and that probably won't go down so well in our society. But nevertheless, what I would like to push for, especially as in terms of the Technology Innovation Agency, we really need to be spending more on experimental development. Within that, you're going to be building these deep scientific and knowledge-based capabilities, and that's where we need the skills development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Garth. And I think to add on to your point of building experimental economic zones, experimental projects, experimental skills development, would it be true in saying that these don't take place in traditional old established firms? These take place in the startups. These take place in the new, innovative, cultural shifting organizations.
The bulk of innovative activity is incremental. That is the reality. Okay, and so if those of you, there was an article by Elon Rios, he's got Rios Core, you might have heard about it. And he coined this term this hasn't really probably caught on, but he calls it For My Reality, 4MR, which is all about using technologies to solve local challenges and create local solutions. So, and he speaks of this example of, it doesn't help if you have access to world-class technology, but you don't, let's say you've got a dairy in Somalia, but you don't have any cold chain to market. So it's looking at an example of, the one I like is the example of empty trips. So there you've got, if you think about a truck that's gone to deliver something to a company, comes back empty. Let's use that capacity. So what these guys have done is that they've got an online marketplace with machine learning and matching algorithms that create verified transporters that you can bid for essentially on a platform. That's one example. So it's a local challenge or solution or issue that could be addressed. But by and large, there's a lot of focus on disruptive technologies and the unicorns of the world. But the reality is, on the ground, people don't really want to be disrupted when we are on a path of development. You can't have continuous disruptions. It's fine for Silicon Valley, for advanced economies. We need to tread a development path first. We need to support nascent industries. And currently our industries are also very conservative. They're actually scared of all this change. They need to be held, their hands need to be held to what is the next step that we have to take. Because they get quite scared by what they read and see on the horizon. And I've seen this when policy discussions take place with manufacturers, etc. Tavern, you can talk of this as well. So by and large, the sexy stuff is the disruptive technologies. The bread and butter is incremental innovation.
I think that appropriately speaks to innovation, the mother of necessity. People don't choose or wake up to just be disruptive. It's when you have to. And you just spoke about what's happening in Ethiopia and Somalia with milk. That's something that is a direct need that needs to be addressed, not just a general feeling of wanting to be disruptive. And I'd like to rope in our next speaker, which is Mr. Tevin Jafta. He's a senior manager at the Enterprise Development Agency. And Mr. Tevin, I think you would be an appropriate person to link to this, because for all of these innovations and these disruptions, these all speak to small, medium enterprises. How do we look at the incubators, as Graf said, that help hold the hands of these innovators in this very tumultuous and uncertain areas that we find ourselves in? How does your agency that you work with look at holding these instruments that ultimately support the development of enterprises?
Okay. I think there's validity in what God has said, that policy needs to speak to how you create the right enabling environment to develop people at the level where they are. Okay. So I think as government we have realized that, and with the new policy instruments that we are introducing, specifically in terms of enterprise development, is to create that enabling environment. So you have to choose an instrument. We have invested billions of rands over the last few years on different instruments. But what we've not seen is the seamless integration of instruments to better service an entrepreneur. Okay? They are there. They need support. Some of them may be in the room today. But how do we support them to such an extent where they can create a product or service that can sell into a market segment? Another thing that we are not facing in South Africa is we are a net, we buy products that is not South African products.
A net importer.
Yeah. And we need to be real about it. And until we start producing the type of products, or until we start buying products from entrepreneurs in our own market, we will never grow this economy. It's simple. And I think that is the type of things that we now want to do. So with the incubators that we're setting up, and new generation of incubators that we're setting up, is to create that enabling environment. To create the type of incubators and accelerators that can hold the hand of the entrepreneur and also provide the right type of instruments at the right time and at the right scale. If there's a need for finance, and maybe people are not going to like me when I say this, the problem that we have in South Africa is not the lack of funding. We have a lot of money. The problem is how to access the money and how to access the money at the right time, because sometimes you don't need money. So what we're trying to do is to set up these incubators. We're repurposing some of them in a good way, not a bad way. We're repurposing some of these instruments to make sure that they can better service entrepreneurs. At the end of the end of mile, we're creating the right type of instruments. We're putting right financing next to it. If there's tech that we need to commercialize, how do we commercialize in different levels? How do we provide the right type of business readiness levels and market readiness levels? Because I always say to entrepreneurs, if you don't have a product, if you can't sell that product, you don't have a business. Okay? So there's certain fundamental principles that we're teaching entrepreneurs now. And it's like going back to basics, but also creating the right environment so that the right environment serves our people. Because sometimes we create, with respect, we create some of Silicon Valley type of models in our own jurisdictions, and sometimes it doesn't work. So you need to understand what is the needs of the entrepreneur, you need to model your instruments, and then you have to create the right instruments at the right time. And I think that is what we're trying to do. When it comes to technology and commercialization of technology, we, for some of us that have listened to the president speak about what government is now going to do, we're setting up technology hubs in underserviced provinces. You know, we can put them in Sandton, we can put them in, you know, urban spaces, but we've started to realize that there's innovators that sits in Vembe. There's innovators that sits in townships that we are not unlocking. And they are solving problems. They are solving problems in their communities, and it's our responsibility now as government to put the right infrastructure with the right environments there where they can start creating these solutions to solve the problems within the different provinces. So we're setting up, the president has given us a commitment, and we see that we're setting them up. We're setting them up in 6 spaces in the next year, and then we're also scaling them to make sure that every province at least have a tech hub that can be able to scale local innovations for solving local problems. Yeah.
That's amazing. And one thing that I love you mentioned was, I guess maybe a cultural thing, but when you speak to someone that has a startup, and the first thing they say, you're like, okay, what do you need help with? The first thing is, I need money. When you ask, okay, show me where the money would go. No, we need funding. Funding for? No, we need money to operate. There's never a clear outline definition. This is where the importance of a business plan comes in. That there's receiving money is a challenge on itself, but once the money has been received, there's even a bigger challenge of reporting, of auditing, of being accountable to the money that you receive.
Yeah.
And I think if we look at the core essence of what money is being used for in a startup sense, sometimes it is actually for labor. Sometimes it's for, in the technology space, paying developers and tech entrepreneurs, paying the coders and the developers that are actually going to make the software. And I think if you get the appropriate partner, you may not even need the money. Moving on to this, I'd like to rope in Ms. Sanisha Munsami, who's the head of innovation at the Technological Innovation Agency. Sanisha, one question I'd like to pose to you leverages on what Tevin had mentioned about partnering without the direct thought of funding. How do you get someone that's in the US, that's in the UK, that has the interest of partnering with a South African entrepreneur, helping them develop, holding them by the hand, and us also sharing our experiences? There's also things that we know that they don't know. How do we facilitate the engagement of a global market with South African demands and challenges?
Okay, thank you for that, Sakile. So we've been involved in 2 or 3 international partnerships. We have worked with many young entrepreneurs and startups. And basically we found that in the UK, for example, with the UK Newton Fund, they've come on board to totally support our young startups. We take 10 startups a year to the UK where they're able to look at commercial output. So what we found that in South Africa, our startups are not short of great ideas, great models to get them somewhere. But what we are short of is how do we commercialize at the end of the day? And I think key to that is what TIA plays. It's called in the valley of death, because you have really good research outputs and it never ever sees the market access. And I think that's clear, in terms of working with CEDA. How do we then pre-incubate and support these startups so that they would have great commercial viability? Another key program that we look at is the one with Switzerland. It's a venture leader program. Similarly, we find that we're able to take these startups, they're able to pitch to us with VC companies, and from there, they look at, is their product viable for the European Union? So I think key for us is, what are the local solutions for our problems that we have, and how will we scale it? And I think that's key for us, and the reason why we embarked on our latest journey, which is looking at Silicon Valley for the reason not of accessing US markets, but rather for how do we scale a startup that exists in South Africa or Africa for global access. And I think that's very, very clear for us, that after doing a lot of research and homework and actually visiting Silicon Valley, we found that the business modeling and the accelerator programs that exist, it's about a whole mindset change. It's about a culture shift in terms of how do we create capacity and skill for the young startups locally, and they will then be able to bring back what they learn in the Bay Area, back home, and we can create our own network. And I think for me, the key thing is then that post-support locally through our incubators that Tavin spoke about very clearly. Now, we may say, why Silicon Valley? Because if you look at it, we are very short of venture capital funding. So as we head to the fourth industrial revolution and we're talking about how do we then access all of the new skills, at the same time, you're looking at what are the new technologies or startup companies that would be producing the technologies. Not only the technologies, but what are the business models that will sustain them? And rightfully so, if you look at startups, it's the only way to disrupt corporate South Africa, to say they'd have to watch out because the new startups are looking at new industries that would be created for the future for South Africa and for Africa. So we're really looking at how do we disrupt the market and how do you get these startups to be supported locally.
That's exactly it. And one thing that you mentioned is the post-support. One thing that's very, very critical in an incubation program or accelerator is what happens afterwards. It's very interesting to see people boast about their statistics. We've helped 5,000 people, 20,000 people. You just ask them, where are they today?
Yeah.
There's no answer. So looking at how do you help someone with their finances? How do you help someone file their taxes? How do you help someone with equity sharing, splitting, dividends? Those are the critical elements that can cripple an organization or boost it to fly. And this conversation wouldn't be fit without the roping in of an actual startup. I'd like to invite the audience to please get your brains warmed up. If you have any questions, we'll be opening up the audience to a session of Q&A. But before we do that, I'd like to engage Mr. Klo Ngobeni. He is the co-founder, if I'm mistaken, and CEO of a technology platform that does exactly that. It bridges the startups, it bridges the youth, it bridges high school, it bridges colleges with the relevant technological actors in the marketplace, facilitating that conversation of what is my next step? What do I do next? Where am I? If I'm in grade 9, what do I study today that will prepare me for when I'm 25? A lot of the things that we look at now is the chicken or the egg. Which one comes first? Do we need the resources now because there's a large demand? Or do we reinvent the whole model and start at a younger age, grade 6, grade 5, whereby we start prepping our students to be engaged for the fourth industrial revolution? So with this being said, I'd like to hand it over to you.
All right, thanks. Just want to start with my name. My name is Misho. So yes, a lot of people get the X quite wrong. No problem.
It's the African in me, sorry.
All right, no problems. So as mentioned, I'm from Geek Culture, which is a tech platform for connecting young people to the world of technology. We want to do things different. We want to approach things different. Even the way we spell our name is completely different. I can bet you now a lot of you will spell it wrong if I asked you to spell it. It's the way we want to think and the way we want to approach and encourage young people to say, let's think different. Let's approach this tech world differently. There's a huge talk about Industry 4.0 AR and what's going on, and we want to move away from the talk and actually do stuff on the ground. So what Geek Culture is about is really connecting young people to the world of technology from universities as well. Universities are great institutions, but they don't expose young people to what's happening outside from the what they're teaching us is usually old stuff that we probably don't need when you go to industry. When you get to industry, industry says we're not skilled enough. So Geek Culture is really trying to bridge that gap, and we say, okay, let university do what university does. We don't want to disturb that yet.
That's a key word.
Yes, it's quite important. Let's start with building and building their skill set. Let's expose these guys while they're in university. Let us expose them, put them in the same rooms as the IT companies. So we deal a lot with a lot of IT companies where it's no longer you're reading about a Microsoft and Intel and IBM. We literally can take you to the offices. They can come to you. We can have workshops between the two parts, and they get to learn directly from them. We do a lot of workshops. We have hackathons as well, which is now, again, industry is saying skill sets, skill sets, skill sets. For us, hackathons are a platform of saying, come test your skills, what you've learned in university, what you've learned in these workshops that we've had, and actually build something. Once again, what you said in terms of Mr. Alan Ray's, in terms of build something for your community. So we take problems from industry, literally anywhere, any sector, government. Last year we did a hackathon with DPSA. Close to 250 young people from across the country came to solve problems for the public sector. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of key culture. But what we realize is, once again, let's filter back to the lower level, because you find that guys are in first year, they've never touched a computer. We're talking industry, we're going for AR, and we're talking about high-level stuff. But the reality is there's a whole bunch of young people, access is one, who've never really touched a computer. A simple thing like, how do I send an email? They know they've got emails, but they don't know what to do with their emails. So we're filtering back and say, let's prepare them from high school, where we have vacation work programs across the country, where it takes anything between 50 and 100 young people throughout the holidays, instead of them sitting and watching Disney network, Cartoon Network and all that stuff. They come through and then they learn how to build apps, how to play around in robotics, the Mindstorms that you mentioned. They learn about your VR. They don't just sit and hear about it, they play around it. But we take it a step further and you say, while you're learning, think about a particular problem in your area and apply. So there's an element of learning and applying in terms of your real life problem at the same time. And obviously they have presentations at the end. We decided then to filter back to primary schools as well, because we realized there's still another gap there. So we literally are doing a pipeline and preparing young people for this space. And that's why I like this panel that's here. Basically, it's good that I'm the last one to speak, because a lot of the things that we need, a lot of things that we've been doing, the next step is for them to connect with you guys. There's a lot of young people that, last year we were running a program with Red Bull, where 5 young people came up with ideas. And in 2 months, we helped them fast-track the ideas to the next level. But the next level is not with us. The next level is with you guys. The next level is them learning about the business side of things, learning about how to take it to markets and all those things. So for us to prepare for this space, to prepare for what's coming, I mean, a lot of people fear that jobs will be taken. I don't really believe that. Yes, jobs will change. We just have to adapt and actually prepare ourselves for what's coming. And part of that is really grooming the young people. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have kids. No, let me not expose anyone. But if you look at how a kid adapts to things around them, how they pick up a language, how they learn something very quickly, it's because they're thrown with their stuff information very quickly. And we don't have to wait for a late period to do that. We can actually start doing that now, where they learn basic things. Instead of playing with robots, they learn the elements of what you can do with the robotic stuff or things. They start building, and that's what we are busy doing now with a whole bunch of the tech community that we have.
Thank you very much. Sure. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Oscar from Netlotlo Trading Enterprise. My question is that we hear a good things about the work government try to implement. Nice about the learnerships and the internships. The big problem that we have, after they've been trained there, get into the learnership internship, they don't, public sector, private sector, they don't absorb those learners. They become seated at home, useless, and the qualification that they have, because it doesn't utilize that qualification, because qualification without utilizing it is good as in paper. Until after training, we absorb those academics, those TVT students coming from college. We cannot breach that particular gap of unemployment until we do something. Public and private come together.
Thank you. Panel, feel free for anyone to jump in. I'd like to add on to that. It's a new notion called shelf technology, something that is a great idea, a great innovation, but it doesn't get taken up. It just sits in a publication on a shelf and it dies. How do we then foster that, okay, here's a young individual that has come up with an innovation that isn't anywhere else in the world, and it addresses a local demand and challenge in South Africa? How does that person, after being skilled, learned, and there's a large culture in South Africa of people that are certificated but not practically trained. The people have the qualifications, but moving on to say this is something that we can build from bottom up is something that we need to address. Panel.
Okay, thank you for that, Sikile. Just to address your question at the back, so we run a number of learnerships and internships, and what we've realized is exactly that. And we've been looking at putting the learners and the interns through a program which relates to the skills that are required for the future. So in other words, we give them entrepreneurial thinking, innovative thinking, creative thinking, and they learn decisive making. So we have a program that runs for a few weeks, and by giving them that skills, we try to create a culture of entrepreneurship. So moving away from you've been employed by an employer, but rather becoming the future startup or employee. And I think very clearly what Sikile has latched onto is we've created an internship called a commercialization internship, which is a specialized internship where we have interns that either have their masters in science or technology, and basically they then get commercialization exposure. They then look at the higher education institutes, and basically they look at the IP sitting on the shelf and which ones could be commercialized. So over the past 5 years, we've trained about 50 of them, and all of them have been taken up. So we were actually preparing them for technology transfer offices to look exactly at that. But because of the skill they have acquired over time, they got taken up by IP firms, venture capital partners, and some of them are now sitting even internationally. So very, very key is how do we take the learners and the interns that are currently doing some form of technical skill, and how do we look at what are the opportunities to create businesses out of that, linked to technology, low-end technology as well.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, can I just add to that response? Over it, thanks. Hi. My perspective is that often people focus on either a supply-side intervention or a demand-side intervention. We talk in these orthodox economic terms. But if I'm not mistaken, one of the priorities of the president, as Farouk State of the Nation address, is inclusive growth, which is growth that includes local communities, that includes job seekers, so it's a different way of looking at the problem. And I think more and more, in previous years we did have growth, but a lot of that growth was also without jobs as well. Even when we were growing under Trevor Manuel and Mbeki and all that, sort of back in that era, there was growth, but there weren't jobs. And so I think slowly what I'm seeing in the policy discourse is this notion of inclusive growth and moving away and doing things differently.
Next question. I'd like to take the last question as we wrap up the session. Please introduce yourself and your organization.
Okay, my name is Sabelo Mine. I work for an organization called Mindworks. I was just looking at the jobs of the future, and for me, they will be tilted towards countries or economies that have very good STEM skills. Now, when you look at South Africa, we have a huge challenge when it comes to STEM skills. And when you look at the unemployed, the young people who are highly unemployable in South Africa, they lack those skills. So therefore, my question is, what is it that can be done to make sure that we prepare these young people for the jobs of the future?
Thank you. Before that goes straight to the panel, I'd like to pose this initial response to Ms. Carrie Juice from the DBSA. Carrie, I'd like for you to address the question the gentleman has shared in relation to the YES program, Harambe, and Microsoft partnerships, whereby it deals with the grassroots innovation and challenges that are in the communities, as you had mentioned, in Tembisa, that isn't in the suburbs, but directly where the challenges are needed. Carrie.
Thanks. It's actually a great question. So one of the solutions that we're proposing, we actually refer to STEAM skills now. So we've included the arts in that because creativity, whether it's creative thinking, the expression across the arts, is also a critical skill for the future. So these D-labs that have been conceptualized speak exactly like Sakile said, is to access to the STEAM skills. And when you start looking at the jobs crisis or the youth challenge with unemployment now, we actually need to look at the full value chain, which means ECD. We actually need to start right back there and create the full spectrum of access to the skills, whether it's the science, the maths, and the technology, arts that I've mentioned. The other key thing is also, and this is, I suppose this is always an interesting topic, so you'll have to cut me off because we can go on forever, is what does maths for the future look like? Is it the same? So we're sitting with, I've mentioned Udacity University, that is, you can get online. I mean, a few weeks ago, some of us were in the States at Udacity University driving in an autonomous vehicle that had been pre-coded by kids from Africa who didn't have a full school education around science and maths. So what that taught us is we actually don't need to be taught the way we've been taught. We need to start looking at how we teach, what we teach. Is it the full spectrum of maths, or is it the components that fit with the skills and the jobs? So that's why the hub's accompanied with, and I think it might tag to the other gentleman's question, is when we look at the jobs and the absorption and that for the future, we need to look at this whole ecosystem. So how, if we're going to take on learnerships, is who needs the skills? So that we're very intentional. So to go trigger the private sector to say, what skills do you need? How can we support access to those skills? Train someone up so that they also fit your organizational culture, as an example. So those are ways that we're busy doing that. And it's very much for people who have not had access before, because that's actually our future.
Perfect. Thank you very much, panel. I'd like to take the opportunity to wrap up the panel session. This was the fourth industrial revolution, South Africa and Silicon Valley to the globe. One thing that is a big key takeaway from our discussion today is the communication and the coordination of a tripartite alliance between government, private sector, as well as education. Education is always looking at how best can we skill our students. Government is always looking at the regulation and the ramifications of the technology. And the private sector is looking at the risk. How do we manage it and how do we mitigate it? I believe if we continue this conversation between these three stakeholder engagements, we'll definitely see South Africa be on a rise and a rise. Thank you. Until next time.